Welcome, everyone, to the Ready for the Draft podcast. I am your host, Gregg Schutze. This is episode 22 of the 2024 podcast series, where we take a look at the draft-eligible prospects to get you ready for the NFL draft. And now that the combine is in our rearview mirror, we really are getting into the heart and soul of the pre-draft process. This is where we get into free agency, and that's really where a lot of the dynamic of a lot of these teams can change, and really that thought process with the draft ultimately changes with it. And obviously we have a lot of the individual workouts, pro days that we're really getting into, and now things are really starting to get interesting because the rosters are starting to take shape and the draft needs really start to come out. So what we want to do is take a look at free agency of what it's done to each of these teams with their first pick. We're going to kind of go through really the entirety of the first round. We'll also take a look at those teams that don't have a first round pick and really kind of take a look at them as well. So that's going to be Carolina, Cleveland, Houston, no longer with the first rounder. So let's go ahead and jump into things, and we'll really talk about Chicago sitting there at number 1 overall. We know the Bears have been on the clock since the end of the season when we knew that Carolina was going to have that number 1 overall pick, which now is Chicago's, obviously, because they gave up that number 1 pick a season ago. And obviously the big question mark was what's going to happen with Justin Fields. Do they keep him? Do they trade him? Do they keep him and draft Caleb Williams? Ultimately, Justin Fields has been traded to the Pittsburgh Steelers. They get a 6th-round pick in return, and that really sets the stage for Caleb Williams. When we look at Williams and what he's done, he was at his pro day. I watched it on the NFL Network, and I think there have been some that have come out and said that it's underwhelming. I think Dan Orlovsky of ESPN was one of those. And look, it wasn't a spectacular pro day, but it was one of those things to where he was there to prove a point and that he can throw balls from within the pocket. And there were also some throws. Look, this is a guy that wanted to showcase his teammates as well. So you saw some throws to Brendan Rice where he had to kind of extend away from his frame. You saw one to Taj Washington on an out route, threw the ball out in front of him, really had Taj extend for it. I think Taj even told the NFL Network after that, hey, he threw that for me so that I could show out, and show out he did. He was able to extend for that football, make that hands catch before going out of bounds. Brendan Rice on that catch, coming across the middle on that in-breaking route, able to really pluck the ball out of the air over his head. Yes, Caleb Williams didn't put it on him, but I think that was by design. But you saw the effortless delivery, throwing the ball, a good 60, 70 yards down the field with ease. Never looked uncomfortable with any of the delivery. Everything looked to be fluid. He missed a couple of balls, but he knew exactly what he did wrong, telling the NFL Network there as well. Look, this guy's all about the creativity, his ability to improvise when he's off script, and then some of the different arm angles and the throws that he's able to make. Everybody has seen that film. What you wanted to see was, can Caleb Williams throw the football outside the numbers, down the field? Can this guy, make the layered throws? Can he come off of a primary receiver? Obviously, some of those things you can't quite simulate, but I thought everything, throwing those throws on time, in rhythm from within the pocket, definitely helped himself. And look, he's going to Chicago. They've got DJ Moore. They've got Keenan Allen now at the wide receiver position. So, there is some flexibility there with that number 9 overall pick. What do they do there? Do they try to get a receiver, Rome Odunze or Malik Neighbors, or do they potentially look at either the offensive line or D-line? I think with this, Caleb Williams, is going to be that number 1 overall pick. And look, when the Bears, you talk about Rex Grossman, Jay Cutler, Mitchell Trubisky, Justin Fields, quarterback play has really failed to live up to expectations. So Caleb, he's always said that he wants to rewrite history. Bears are hoping that he can finally do that and get the job done there in Chicago. Washington, Jaden Daniels, I think, is still the guy. They ultimately traded Sam Howell away to Seattle, and Jaden Daniels is going to step in. I think he's the better fit between him and Drake May. Let's not throw J.J. McCarthy into the conversation. I think really when you look at it, who has Cliff Kingsbury been working with? It's the dual quarterbacks like Kyler Murray, Caleb Williams. You bring in Marcus Mariota, and when you look at that, he's going to be the backup. And as that backup, he's more similar. His game is more similar to Jaden Daniels. And look, Jaden Daniels, he improved his passer completion percentage from 62% to 70% there at LSU, and you saw the quarterback rating jump by 30 points. First and only FBS player in history with over 12,000 passing yards and 3,000 yards on the ground. And then, look, 35 of his 40 touchdowns within the pocket. and just a dynamic runner. I think that's one of the things that I think Cliff Kingsbury needs to work on with him is the eyes want to drop and look to where he's going to run as opposed to creating with his legs. I think he does a great job manipulating in the pocket, but then when he starts to take off to run, I think Caleb Williams does a great job of still keeping those eyes down the field and finding his receivers. I think that's something that Jaden Daniels needs to work on. Cliff Kingsbury working with him there, but I think this is really a no-brainer for the Commanders. I think it's a great pick for them and really gets that organization moving in the right direction now with the head coaching change to Dan Quinn. Patriots sitting there at number 3. This is where it gets interesting, right? Because Gerard Mayo, the new head coach, Elliott Wolf is a de facto GM. They inherited a team with a lot of holes, right? Obviously, the quarterback position is one. Mac Jones was traded away. You've got Bailey Zappi on the roster. You bring in Jacoby Brissett. I think this guy is the perfect bridge quarterback to help a rookie along. I thought that was a great pickup. Demario Douglas was quite the surprise. Led the team with 561 receiving yards. Yes, he led the team with 561. Second in receptions with 49. 3 of the team's other 4 leading receivers came from non-wideouts. Led by Ezekiel Elliott, now an unrestricted free agent. And so obviously, looking at, should they potentially take Marvin Harrison and then try to trade back into the draft, into round 1 to take a guy like Bo Nix or potentially Michael Penix Jr.? I think it's always a possibility, but they need to get the quarterback situation right. I mean, I think that's still too much of a gamble to try to trade back into round 1 unless they've got something already cooked up. You look at the receiver position, they bring in KJ Osborne. Kendrick Bourne has been brought back. They've got Jalen Reagor on the roster, Tyquan Thornton, Juju Smith-Schuster. A lot of depth at the position, but they don't have that number 1 wideout. So I think that's still something that the Patriots are going to be looking at for sure. Here's the other thing. They lost a right tackle in Trent Brown. So you lose him. And so what do you do there at that tackle position? They brought in Chukwuma, a core 4 to play right tackle. Is Michael Onwenu going to play guard or is he going to play tackle? You could potentially start Sidney Sow at right guard. Obviously, you've got Connor McDermott at the left side with Cole Strange and David Andrews filling out that offensive line. Could they potentially, maybe even trade down with a team like the Giants or maybe Minnesota and target an offensive lineman? Potentially Joe Alt if they decide to sit there at 3 or right in that top 5 range. But if they trade down at right tackle position, you could go after Taliese Fuaga. You could go after a J.C. Latham and be in good shape there. Or you could go, potentially if one of those receivers falls and you get down there to 11 with Minnesota, then hey, you could take a receiver at 11. You could also go with that lineman at 11 and then take your receiver at 23. I think that it at least gives them a little bit of flexibility, some options there for them. But I think still at the end of the day, you've got to get the quarterback right. You've got Alex Van Pelt as your quarterback coach and an offensive coordinator. And he has a lot of success working with a lot of different quarterbacks. And I think Drake May kind of fits the mold of the group that he's worked with. Everyone from Aaron Rodgers to Deshaun Watson. I think Drake May's ability to manipulate the pocket, big, strong-arm kid. Pocket presence, like I said, is smooth. He makes a lot of things look effortless. He's got a little bit of growing to do as a quarterback, so I think that's why Jacoby Brissett, perfect bridge quarterback, and then allow Drake May to step into the role maybe on year 2. Arizona sitting there at number 4, and with the Cardinals, this is a group that look, Monty Austin-Fort and Jonathan Gannon. Look, Monty in his first year as a GM, he traded down, ended up going with Paris Johnson Jr. kind of at the recommendation of Kyler Murray. I thought that was a smart move, keeping that quarterback happy. And when you look at the receiver core, I think Marvin Harrison Jr. is a no-brainer here. Michael Wilson, Chris Moore was brought in from Tennessee, Greg Dortch, Zach Pascal. Nobody really moves the needle. Nobody really gets any excitement there. There isn't a true number 1, and so that's why Marvin Harrison Jr. is going to be the guy here. If, say, the Patriots do surprise and go with MHJ there at number 3 overall, then I think this is going to end up being Malik Neighbors. I really do. Defensively, look, they brought in Bilal Nichols, Kieris Tonga, Justin Jones up front. To shore that up, and then they get a corner in Sean Murphy Bunting, but I still think they need another corner, so we could probably see that later on in the draft. Hint, hint. But I think this is a no-brainer for Arizona. Get that number one wideout for Kyler Murray. Because, look, Kyler Murray has played with the likes of Larry Fitzgerald, DeAndre Hopkins, A.J. Green. He's even had Marquise Brown. He doesn't even have that on this roster right now. Really, the number one wideout is Michael Wilson. He's more of a complimentary receiver at this point in his career. Lost Rondale Moore as well to free agency. So he needs a number one, a go-to guy, and Marvin Harrison Jr. can absolutely be the guy to deliver that. The Chargers sitting there at number 5. What are the Chargers going to do? You've got Jim Harbaugh in there as your head coach. Greg Roman is your offensive coordinator. Jesse Minter came with him from Michigan as his defensive coordinator. So, obviously, Jim Harbaugh loves to run the football. And he's already come out and said he wants to be more physical. I look at this line. Rashawn Slater and Zion Johnson on the left side. Corey Linsley at the pivot. Jamari Sawyer at right guard. And then Trey Pipkins at right tackle. It's a pretty solid group overall, I think. I think there's a lot of speculation that maybe at number 5 they would take Joe Alt and then move him over to the right side. Look, Pipkins, he had the big year in 2022, ends up signing the big deal, and then he struggled in 2023. Look, the physicality has never been an issue with him. I think ultimately if he gets in with Jim Harbaugh and his group, Greg Roman, they could develop and bring him back to that 2022 form. I don't know that necessarily taking a tackle makes the most sense. They don't have to, at least in round number 1, is what I'm saying. There's a lot of speculation that, hey, Brock Bowers, you get a tight end. That's where Jim Harbaugh is going to go with this pick. But they bring in Will Dissly and Hayden Hurst at the tight end position. You've also got Donald Parham as a carryover there at the position. So Dissly and Hurst fit really what he wants to do because they're going to be inline tight ends. They're going to be guys that are going to want to block, but they can also catch a little bit. That's really more of Jim Harbaugh's style. So I just don't see that happening either. Then you start talking about, the cornerback position. There's also an area of need. Asante Samuel Jr. at one side, but look, Michael Davis is a free agent, so Christian Fulton, they get him from Tennessee, the former first rounder. I look at that, and that may temper the need for a corner. I don't think, even if they trade down, that's probably not going to be the way to go. So let's just think about this real quick. The Chargers are the most likely team to trade down, right? Because after the top 4, which seem to be no-brainers with the picks, then ultimately this group, you trade down. You trade to, say, Minnesota at 11 and then 23. At 11, you can get that offensive tackle. You could get Taliesin Fuaga or J.C. Latham to be your right tackle. Really bring some physicality to that running game, right? And then, or even a Brock Bowers at tight end. And then at 23, then you can go ahead and go after a receiver, whether it's Ladd McConkey, Adonai Mitchell. Those are guys that would be in that area as well. But when I look at this receiving core, without Keenan Allen and without Mike Williams, Allen with the Bears, Mike Williams now with the Jets, you've got Quentin Johnston, who has yet to rise to the occasion, Josh Palmer, who stepped up pretty well for this team, and then Darius Davis. They don't have a number 1 wide receiver. You've got Malik Neighbors sitting there at number 5 overall. Stay there and get your number 1 for Justin Herbert. Justin Herbert needs a guy like Malik Neighbors, shows off incredible speed, that vertical speed. He's on the toes of the corner so quickly. This is a guy that can get down the field in a hurry, be a playmaker. Look, he caught 89 passes for over 1,500 yards, an average of 17.6 yards per reception, 14 touchdowns, became just the second Tiger to record 2 1,000-yard seasons. Josh Reed being the other. It's a good trivia question, but he's just so quick off the ball. Dynamic as a route runner. This is a guy that's going to make you miss after the catch as well. 30 missed tackles forced, third among receivers in the FBS. And look, this is a guy that could very well end up being the top wide receiver taken off the board. If I'm the Chargers and I'm sitting there at number 5, that's got to be my guy. Help out Justin Herbert and then kind of move on from there. Giants sitting at 6. This is another team that's interesting. They could potentially trade up to number 3 to get the quarterback that they want. Make sure that they're getting ahead of some of these other teams. Maybe trade with the Patriots. Patriots could trade down and still get potentially a number 1 wideout, potentially a quarterback as well that they covet. The Giants, though, if they're talking quarterback, here's the thing that doesn't make any sense when we're talking about this, right? First you think about it. The Giants have finished in the bottom 2 in the NFC East in all but 2 of the last 12 seasons. And in fact, the last time that New York actually won the division was in 2011 when Eli Manning led them to to the Super Bowl victory over New England. Daboll's season, look, they finished 9-7-1, first winning record in 7 years, won a wild card game over Minnesota. Daniel Jones was the first quarterback to have 300-plus passing yards, 2-plus passing touchdowns, and 70-plus rushing yards in a playoff game. Easily his best season in New York. So there's really a lot of optimism coming in. Now all of a sudden we're talking about Daboll's future and Jones's future. Look, Jones signed a 4-year, $160 million contract. Then he suffered a neck injury. This is the second time he's had a neck injury. That caused him to miss 2 games. Then he tore his ACL in Week 12. That ended his season. So what are they going to do? You've got him with $40 million owed to Jones. Do you invest in another quarterback? Now you've already brought in Drew Lock, 1-year deal worth $5 million. There's Tommy DeVito that's on the roster as well. Are you going to continue to invest in quarterbacks? It doesn't make a whole lot of sense given the moves that they've made thus far. Now the Giants gave up a league high 85 sacks a season. I mean, just thinking about that, that's just gross. Former first rounder Andrew Thomas, he's cemented as a left tackle, but would they use the pick on a tackle given that Jermaine Illuminor was signed to really push Evan Neal for playing time on the right side? I think Illuminor, he excelled in pass protection with the Raiders, and the Jets have obviously been lacking that. Joe Alt could come in and take that right tackle spot when you already have Illuminor, who's been a solid pass protector. You move Evan Neal into guard. What are you doing? I mean, unless you're deciding to move Illuminor into that other guard spot, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It doesn't make sense just given the moves that they've made to this point. Then there's the edge rush position where Kayvon Thibodeau, 11.5 sacks a season ago, but no returning edge rusher amassed more than 2.5 sacks, and that was Azeez Ojulari. So Dallas Turner, Jared Verse, hey, they would look good in Giant Blue, right? But then Brian Burns, you add him to the fold, and that really ends the talk of an edge rusher. So receiver, that's really where I think you need to focus if you're the Giants. Quantity doesn't always mean quality. And you got a lot of guys that look like the exact same wideout, right? You got Wan'Dale Robinson. You had Sterling Shepard a season ago. He's no longer on the roster. But then there's Jalen Hyatt, Darius Slayton, Isaiah McKenzie was brought in. But none of these guys are a true number one wideout. And if you've got a guy like Rome Odunze sitting there on the board, why wouldn't you go get him? Because look, this receiver class is deep. But when you're talking about this receiver class being as deep as it is, the 3 at the top, there's a little bit of a gap before you get to wide receiver 4. And with Rome Odunze, look, this dude is an absolute beast. You watch the route running ability, you watch the vertical speed, ran a 4.45 at the combine, and just a competitive, you see the competitive nature with this guy. 1,640 yards, single season UW record, 13 touchdowns. The guy was just a playmaker, a guy that could go up and win, high point the football. 212 pounds. So he's a big dude, but he carries the weight so well because of that fluidity. He is able to sink his hips in and out of those breaks. Gets on the corner's toes vertically, sets up his man really well. You see the long speed, you see the suddenness on display, especially with his double moves. But look, that play against Oregon State, I think Ryan Cooper was covering him, and it was a 7-yard or 12-yard touchdown. Made such a wicked sell off the slant at the stem with a plant to the inside, head and shoulder fake. So demonstrative with the move, then cuts it back to the outside, gets that separation, track the ball over his shoulder for the easy touchdown. To me, you look at Odunze, this is a guy, he's a wide receiver 1, he's an alpha, and go get a guy for Daniel Jones, and get that weapon for him. I think it makes all too much sense. Tennessee at number 7. So this is a team that finished the 2023 season with a 28th ranked offense, 6-11 season. Vrabel's let go. Brian Callahan comes in, formerly the Cincinnati offensive coordinator. Going to build that offense around Will Levis. Ryan Tannehill's out. Mason Rudolph is in as the backup. Obviously, the first order of business was addressing an anemic passing attack, lacking weapons, and that was really where I think a lot of people thought that maybe one of those receivers will fall to the Titans, get someone to help Nuke Hopkins. But then they bring in Calvin Ridley to play opposite Hopkins, and I think that really gives Levis two legitimate options, which then allows Tennessee to focus elsewhere. And really the trio of Levis, Tannehill, and Malik Willis were sacked a combined 64 times. That's tied for fourth most in the league. Andre Dillard experiment, we thought it wasn't going to work. It didn't. I think he gave up 12 sacks on his own. Jalen Duncan, another 9. 21 sacks from your left tackle position. That's just not good. Duncan's not ready for the starting spot. Dillard's gone. To me, it makes all too much sense. Joe Alt is your guy there. 6'9", 321. Started 35 games. Finalist for the Outland and Lombardi Award. Former tight end. What you love about him, he uses that length to his advantage, extends those long arms into the defender, controls him at the point of attack, stifles any inside rush, drives him away from the pocket. The quick feet, stays square, mirrors, uses this quick stab with his right hand to the inside shoulder pad of the defensive end early to win that rep, and then when they try to counter, uses those active feet to keep him in front. Instinctive, tremendous patience on stunts. He does tend to play with the forward lean a little bit because that pad level does tend to creep up. That'll get him into trouble, especially with some of the bull rushers. But as a run blocker, look, hand placement's on point, gets underneath the pad level, excellent leverage, and drives his man a good 4 to 5 yards down the field. Immediate starter, and I think Will Levis would love to have him playing on the left side next to Peter Skoronski. Look, they also brought in Lloyd Cushenberry to play the center, already upgrading that O-line. Atlanta, sitting there at number 8. Look, this is a team through 7 games a season ago. They had a 4-3 record, wins over 3 eventual playoff teams of Green Bay, Houston, and Tampa, and then the wheels kind of fell off. They only won 3 games the remainder of the year. Arthur Smith is let go. Head coach Raheem Morris brought in Zach Robinson, who spent the last 5 seasons as on the Rams coaching staff with Sean McVay as the team's offensive coordinator. So when you look at it, they've been building around their first round picks, their skill position guys, right? Kyle Pitts, a tight end, Drake London, the wideout, dynamic running back, and Bijan Robinson. And you throw in Tyler Algier and a solid offensive line. They really look to only be a quarterback away from really contending in the NFC South because of the offense. And drafting a quarterback just didn't make a whole lot of sense to me. So what do? They bring in Kirk Cousins, $180 million contract. That was exactly what they needed to kind of get that position shored up and get everything squared away. They lack productive receivers to complement London. They added Rondale Moore and Darnell Mooney, so I think that also quiets any thought of targeting a potential wideout with this pick. I look at Ryan Nielsen brought in for the 2023 season at the defensive coordinator spot. Remarkable turnaround in just one season. Defense was 11th in the league in total yards given up. Nielsen's now in Jacksonville. Jimmy Lake takes over. Primary need for the defense is still the same: getting consistent pressure on the quarterback because the pass rush win rate was like 30.9%. That's dead last in the league. Calais Campbell, Bud Dupree finished with a combined 13 of the team's 42 sacks. Neither is currently on the roster. Edge rush trio: Arnold Ebiketie, Caden Ellis, Lorenzo Carter combined for the same total. You look at Dallas Turner, 4'4", 640. The explosiveness is something that they really haven't had, and that's something that I think when you look at what Turner did this past season: 10 sacks, 31 hurries, 20.2 pass rush win rate. He isn't as developed a rusher as Leatu Latu. Doesn't have the power of Jared Verse, but he's got the upside because of all of that athleticism. He just screams potential, and when you look at their defense that Jimmy Lake is going to want to run, he's the perfect guy for this spot. You could say maybe Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold to play corner with A.J. Terrell. I wouldn't be upset with that. Jimmy Lake would want to have a pair of corners locking down the outside, but ultimately, if you get Dallas Turner, get the explosive edge rusher, and hurry up to the podium and make that announcement right away. So now at number 9, that takes us back to the Bears, as I said. And so, when you look at it, hey, their offensive line, they gave up 50 sacks a season ago, 7 most in the league. When you look at it, Darnell Wright was last season's 10th overall pick. He's the right tackle spot, has that locked down. Pro Football Focus actually had Braxton Jones ranked as the Bears' top offensive lineman a season ago. And I've seen countless articles online, Pro Football Focus to NFL.com, saying that Ryan Poles believes in Braxton Jones. So would he bring in another tackle like Olu Fashanu? I don't know that makes sense. Rome Odunze, Malik Neighbors, adding with DJ Moore and Keenan Allen. Look, if one of them's still on the board, I think that probably is the way to go. Give Caleb Williams another weapon. I mean, shoot, why not? But when I also look at it, Chicago made a big-time midseason trade for Montez Sweat. Racked up 6 sacks, 23 pressures in just 9 games with the Bears. But you add another defensive end on the opposite side, I think that should be the focus. You look at Jared Verse, makes a heck of a lot of sense. This was a dude, when COVID hit in 2020, he was a 212-pound tight end at Albany. Bulks up to 240. They decide, hey, he's going to be an edge rusher. 9.5 sacks at Albany, and ultimately, catches the eye of the FBS programs. Transfers to Florida State. 9 sacks, 17 tackles for loss. Another 9 sacks, 12.5 in 2023. This is a guy. Also had another 15 hits, 29 hurries, pass rush win rate of right at about 20%. Then he runs a 4.58 40, 1.5, 9-10 yard split, and then he has 33.5-inch arms. So decently long, decent length to those arms. And what does he do? He reps out 225 over 30 times. So, I mean, when you think about what that means, 31 times with that arm length, that's pretty darn impressive. And I said it was actually a 1.6 10-yard split, but this guy is plenty explosive. I think he can bend, but what you really see is him being able to convert speed to power. Devastating bull rush, power in his hands, and a guy that can also set the edge against the run. You pair him with Montez Sweat, and the Bears, really upgraded their pass rush ability over the last year and a half. Which takes us to the Jets at number 10. And this is one that's really been difficult for me. I haven't really been able to decide where I want to go with the Jets, right? So the Jets could go offensive tackle, or they could go tight end. So when you think about it, Garrett Wilson is your weapon on the outside. You bring in Mike Williams as your number 2 weapon. The tight end spot, you got Tyler Conklin, but could you bring in Brock Bowers to kind of be that weapon over the middle for Aaron Rodgers? Something that he really hasn't had at the tight end spot? Absolutely. But I think at the end of the day, when you look at this group, yes, you signed John Simpson at guard, Tyron Smith, the future Hall of Famer, and Morgan Moses. They're both 1-year deals. And, in the case of Tyron Smith, he's missed 37 games over the last 4 seasons. I think the smart play really is to select Olu Fashanu, let him be groomed by Tyron Smith as his eventual successor. I mean, think about this. Jets, in-season, injuries to Elijah Vera Tucker, Dwayne Brown, Mekhi Becton. It's imperative that you have that backup plan. And ultimately, Tyron Smith, you sign him to a 1-year deal. I don't think he's going to be around too much longer. I don't know that he's going to be able to stay healthy. So you get the guy in to learn from him. And Olu Fashanu, look, 0 sacks given up, just 17 pressures and 689 true pass sets in his 3-year career with Penn State, according to Pro Football Focus. This guy, sure, he's got a ways to go with the run blocking, but as a pass protector, this guy is athletic as all get out, and I think it makes all too much sense for Joe Douglas to pull the trigger there. Minnesota sitting at 11. This is where Minnesota they traded the 23rd overall pick, traded with Houston. Houston's done a lot in free agency, so you look at Minnesota. What are they going to do? Kwesi Adofo-Mensah, the GM, head coach Kevin O'Connell. I think they packaged these picks and looked to move up. In this scenario, they could stay put and still get J.J. McCarthy and keep their pick at 23. We know that's not going to happen because we're going to see a bunch of trades, and I really don't forecast trades in my mock draft. But 6'2", 219, J.J. McCarthy, his athleticism actually reminds you a lot of Kevin O'Connell when he was coming out as an athlete. And when you look at McCarthy, arm strength is good, not great, but he wins with anticipation, creativity as a playmaker, pocket presence, his ability to climb, avoid the rush, sidestep, reset his feet, and fire. Also makes plays on the run. He's a younger guy. But look, they've got Sam Darnold there. I think you can learn from Darnold and then take over that position. Athletic, like I said, ran a 6'8", 2'3" cone drill, which would have tied him with his college teammate Blake Corum, who had the second fastest time among all running backs. So I look at it, J.J. McCarthy should be the guy there for Minnesota. I think it just makes too much sense. At 12, Denver. Russell Wilson's gone. What do you do? Well, there's Ryan Tannehill, Carson Wentz, Josh Dobbs, Zach Wilson on just sitting there. None of those guys to move the needle. Only be a bridge until a young quarterback could take the reins. So I think I've seen some speculation in the media and on especially social media that hey, maybe they'll tank 2024, select in-state product, Shedeur Sanders with the top pick in next year's draft. Why would Sean Payton do that? This just seems like he needs to win now. Broncos haven't been to the playoffs since they won the Super Bowl in 2015, Super Bowl 50. One winning season, and now they're on to their fifth head coach. Not a very patient organization. They can go in a lot of different directions with this pick. When you think about quarterback, Bo Nix could be this guy, but 12 just still feels a little bit too high for that. You could talk about Bo Nix's game. I think there's a lot to like there. But I don't feel comfortable enough putting Bo Nix there at 12. I think Denver could trade back into round 1, or they could trade down, frankly, and still pick up Bo Nix. Just 12 just seems a little bit too rich. You look at it, Zach Allen, second straight season with 5 sacks. He needs a guy playing alongside him. Byron Murphy makes a lot of sense here on the back end with the defense. Patrick Surtain needs a running mate. Jaquan McMillan looks like he's going to be a stud there at the nickel. You got Riley Moss, Damari Mathis, PJ Locke at the other spot. Are they the true answer? Could Terrion Arnold take over that spot? I ultimately look at the pass rush. You've got Jonathan Cooper, Nick Bonito. I think they overachieved with 16.5 sacks. They still finished 21st in the league with 42 sacks. I look at Laiatu Latu. If it wasn't for the injury history, we'd be talking about him as a top 10 pick, no doubt about it. 114 pressures, 26 sacks, another 17 hits in 2 seasons at UCLA. Won the Lombardi and Ted Hendricks Award. The best pure pass rusher in this year's draft. Violent swipes, clubs, chops, rips, arm overs, wins at the point of attack. He can bend plenty. Hey, he's not the most bendy, flexible guy, but he can still bend and turn the corner in a hurry. Flattens out, gets to the quarterback. This is a guy that you want this guy on your roster as a pure pass rusher. And if Turner has the freakish athleticism and Verse has the raw power, Latu's the most polished edge rusher. And at number 12, I think Denver would be ecstatic to get him here. You think about some of the edge rushers that they've had over the years, Von Miller, DeMarcus Ware. They're missing that right now on this roster. Latu, not saying that he's going to be at that level, but when you watch him play, there's really a lot to like. The hand usage is just freakish. Raiders at 13. What are the Raiders going to do? I think this is one of the things, they hired Antonio Pierce. That was the biggest move. Could they go after a quarterback? You've got Aiden O'Connell there on the roster. Gardner Minshew helped mentor Anthony Richardson. I ultimately think, could they trade up for Jaden Daniels? I mean, they're sitting there at 13. I just don't see a team that would be willing to trade down that far. They're quarterback-needy teams in the top 3. I just don't see it happening. I think what ends up happening is they either trade back into round 1, possibly at the beginning of round 2, get Michael Penix Jr. as their quarterback. I think that's ultimately where the Raiders should go. Defensive tackle was a huge need. Then they bring in Christian Wilkins. Big time get in free agency. That takes that position out of play. So you look at the offensive line. Illuminor's gone. Colton Miller at left tackle. Thayer Munford actually filled in at both positions. I still think his best position is inside at guard. But I thought he more than held his own. You can still go with J.C. Latham or Taliese Fuaga right here. Upgrade multiple positions at the same time because then you'd have to kick Thayer Munford inside. But I also look at that cornerback spot. look, corner has to be an area of focus when you're in a league or a division with Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. You have to see them twice a year. Amik Robertson, he's already signed with Detroit, so he's gone. I thought Jack Jones, Nate Hobbs showed promise. Ja'Cory Bennett is coming along as well. What you're lacking there is a true CB1. I look at Terrion Arnold, fits the bill. Tremendous footwork. This is a guy that, he's fearless. He's going to get right up on you. The fluid hips, turn and run, the vertical speed, impeccable timing with his hands to make a play on the football. I just think he fits what the Raiders are looking to do on the outside. Get him there and be the alpha on the outside. Saints sitting there at 14. They could go edge rusher. I know Peyton Turner battled injuries along with Cam Jordan. Isaiah Foskey didn't register a single sack. Carl Granderson actually had a big year, 8.5 sacks. I think Leatu Latu made a lot of sense here if he fell. Chase Young picking him up, much needed depth to the position. I know he had what was it neck surgery this offseason, but I think he'll be okay for the season and be ready to go. Chris Olave just had his first 1,000-yard season. Michael Thomas is gone. They bring in Cedric Wilson. You've got Rashid Shaheed, A.T. Thomas. They're complimentary receivers. You could potentially go after Brian Thomas Jr. here, that vertical threat. Focus should be on the offensive line, let's face it. Trevor Penning, he just hasn't worked out there at the left tackle spot. If anything, you move him inside. Andrus Peat is a free agent. Ryan Ramczyk, battled chronic knee injuries. Not really sure with Ramczyk. Had a procedure on his knee that's supposedly going to have him ready. But his future, there are concerns there. Penning, he was benched in week 7, managed just 11 snaps the rest of the season per Pro Football Focus. He's under contract through 2025, but could you really go back to him? I look at J.C. Latham. He's a guy that was told, ESPN, the Bleacher Report, anyone that'll listen, he wants a shot at left tackle. And I think this is an organization that he can go to and play that position, but he also has the flexibility to also play right tackle in the event Ryan Ramczyk and that knee just don't hold up. 6'6", 342, 35 and an 1/8 arms, 11-inch hands. This dude's the most powerful offensive lineman in this year's draft. He could go a lot higher than 14. I think it'd be a steal to get him here, get him on the roster. I think it ultimately ends up upgrading, a couple of positions there if you're able to get J.C. Latham there and have him play left tackle. Colts at 15. 9-8 record, fell short of the playoffs. Anthony Richardson obviously had that shoulder surgery at the end of the year. Michael Pittman Jr., that was a big get there in free agency, 3-year, $70 million deal. Josh Downs, Alec Pierce, supporting cast looks good. Brian Thomas Jr. could be enticing to round out the receiving core. But I ultimately think tight end is going to be the spot here. I think it makes a lot of sense. They could go corner. Look, they had 15 interceptions a season ago. Outside of Kenny Moore, the nickel, with 3 interceptions, only 2 others were made by corners. Quinyon Mitchell could potentially be the guy here because, look, his ceiling really is Atlanta. But I look at Bowers. Has the potential to be that different type of playmaker, gives a different dimension to the offense, and become a favorite target of Anthony Richardson up the middle of the field. I think it makes all too much sense. Pittman Jr., Downs, Pierce, Bowers, you're really starting to build that offense around Anthony Richardson, and it just feels like a Chris Ballard move to just go with the best player available. And he's playing often. He's playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. Seattle sitting at 16. Pete Carroll's out. Mike McDonald is in. Defensive philosophy. I think that fits the personnel well. Seattle ranked 31st in the league against the run. Leonard Williams re-signed, but he and Jaron Reed, Jonathan Hankins, they're all at least 30 years of age at the start of the season. Byron Murphy II, keep an eye on him. He'd make a lot of sense. Seattle's running game finished 28th in the league, 71 yards away from last place, beaten up by underwhelming play by the interior of the offensive line. Right tackle Abraham Lucas battled a knee injury, shut down for 11 games as a result. So obviously, they need to address that offensive line. New offensive coordinator Ryan Grubb, UW's offensive coordinator. I think he ultimately targets Troy Fautanu. who was his left tackle there. This is the guy that ultimately I think, he can play tackle. He's proven that. But I think ultimately you get him at guard, and I think he'll be a Pro Bowl, all-pro caliber guard. This guy, you watch his sets and pass protection when it's at the 45 degrees, a vertical set. Quick hop to the outside. The kick slide is phenomenal. His ability to climb to the next level. He can get overpowered at times because some of the longer edge rushers are able to get their hands on him. But this guy wins because of his hands. He stays busy, active hands, and then getting out in space, the lateral agility, and then the ability to track down guys down the field, especially as a lead blocker. I love the versatility. I think Grubb is going to want his guy. I think it just makes all too much sense. Keep the guy in state. Jags at 17. The Jags, obviously a disappointing year. Kind of a weird season, 9-8, missed out on the playoffs. It looks so promising after they win the AFC South for the first time since 2017, win a playoff game, and then went toe-to-toe with Patrick Mahomes before losing 27-20. They signed Mitch Morse to the center spot. They lose Calvin Ridley, who signed with the Titans. So wide receiver, they bring in Gabe Davis, Devin Duvernay. That kind of tempers the need for Brian Thomas Jr. here right now. Defensively, look, my Caldwell's out. I mentioned Ryan Nielsen is in. He gets a defense that's 23rd in the league in yards given up. I think when you look at it, I think this is where they're going to be focusing. Defensively, they did. Josh Allen, they put the franchise tag on him. They bring in Eric Armstead up front. I think he'll play a similar role to what Nielsen had with Calais Campbell in Atlanta. Ronald Darby, Darnell Savage take care of a corner and a safety spot. Darby replaces Darius Williams opposite Tyson Campbell. When I look at Nielsen, it's going to feature man-to-man. So adding depth will be a focus for sure. Look, Darby, he started 95 of 105 career games, but he's not a number one corner. Mitchell is the guy that absolutely is that. Has 6 interceptions, 2 of which were returned for touchdown in 2022, 45 pass breakups, 123 tackles, 7.5 tackles for loss. This guy primarily worked at Toledo in off-man and zone coverage. You saw the ability to close on the football, the ball skills, the instincts. But then he shows up at the Senior Bowl, shows press man, and absolutely lock guys down. Then he runs the 4.33 40 at the Combine. Any 38-inch vertical leap to show off the lower body explosiveness. And then I mentioned that physicality, his ability to 7.5 tackles for loss, and then the physicality at the line of scrimmage at the Senior Bowl. He puts up 20 reps at 225, which was tops among the corners and tied for second among all defensive backs. To me, Mitchell is my cornerback one. I don't know that he ends up coming off the board first. I think Jacksonville would love to get him here at 18, though. At 17, because 18 is Cincinnati. You've got Orlando Brown and Trent Brown now at the tackle spots. Jonah Williams is gone. So when you look at this spot, Tyler Boyd not expected to be back. T. Higgins asked for a trade after the franchise tag. You need to get a guy in there to complement Jamar Chase. This is where Brian Thomas comes off the board. Vertical threat. He's 6'3", 209, ran a 4.33 40 at the Combine. Tracks the ball so well over his shoulder, gets down the field in a hurry, can also sink his hips as a route runner. I think this would be a perfect match made in heaven there in Cincinnati. Rams at 19. There are a couple of moves that they could do. I think offensively, the offensive line, Alaric Jackson and Rob Havenstein, I think they've solidified the tackle spot. They re-signed Kevin Dotson, bring in Jonah Jackson, which allows Steve Avila to move over to the pivot where he played at TCU. Offensive line is set. Corner, Akella Witherspoon, led the Rams in total passes defended with 17, including a team-high 3 interceptions, but he's a free agent, maybe elsewhere. Darius Williams signed, second stint with the Rams. He should be your CB2. Who's going to be the CB1? If Quinyon Mitchell or Terrion Arnold are here, I think that's where they go. Could Nate Wiggins convince them with that 4.28 40? I just don't buy it. I just don't see it happening. I think really what they need is a veteran presence. You've got young guys like Darion Kendrick, who didn't play that bad. I mean, he had 10 pass breakups a season ago. Kobe Durant, Trey Tomlinson. You need that number one, and I think it's going to end up being a veteran like a Tre'Davious White, potentially a Xavier Howard. So when you look at that line up front, Kobe Turner looks like he's the next interior pass rusher for them. 9 sacks to lead the team. You lose Aaron Donald. Byron Murphy, if he's there. If not, then maybe Johnny Newton makes a lot of sense at that role. You look at edge rush as well. Laiatu Latu is the local product if he's available. When you think about when the Rams won the Super Bowl, AD had 12 and a half sacks, but then he also had Leonard Floyd, who racked up 9.5. Von Miller was a late addition to the team, 5 sacks in just 8 games. If you want to duplicate the recipe of success, you get another guy to complement Byron Young on the outside and Laiatu Latu. But here's the thing with Latu, especially with him off the board. I mentioned that need for a pass rush and to have the complementary pieces, but adding an interior pass rusher to complement Turner. Get Byron Murphy in there, allow Murphy to go to work, there with Turner, and then you've got Young coming off the edge. Then you could use another pick, potentially even a free agent signing to take care of that other edge spot. I think it makes a lot of sense. You're getting that D tackle that a lot of people think could come off the board as high as 11. You get him here at 19. I think that'd be a great move there for the Rams. Pittsburgh at 20. You've noticed I haven't said Taliesin Fuaga yet. I think this is ultimately where he goes. First off, Kenny Pickett's out, traded to Philly because they picked up Russell Wilson and Justin Fields. So you've got the present and the future set up. Mike Tomlin, playing checkers while everyone else is. Playing chess while everyone else is playing checkers. So he's got the quarterbacks solidified. They can look elsewhere. Mason Cole's gone. There's a gap there at that center spot. Look, JPJ, Jackson Powers Johnson, makes a lot of sense. When you think about it, they haven't found a true replacement for Marquise Pouncey, the last center that they took in round number 1 back in 2010. Makes a lot of sense there. Tomlin and Omar Khan were there to see Lab McConkey at Georgia's Pro Day. So when you think about that, this is a dude that ran a 4.39 40, impressive combine. You pair him with George Pickens because, look, Allen Robinson and Deontay Johnson are gone. Johnson was traded to Carolina. Van Jefferson, Calvin Austin III, they are not going to be that number 2 guy. I ultimately think at the end of the day, Taliesin Fuaga makes the most sense. I think Tomlin is going to get aggressive and try to go after him. When you think about it, it just, again, it's a pick that makes all too much sense. Dan Moore struggled at left tackle. Gave up 55 pressures, second most in the league among tackles, 8 sacks, which was good for a tie for 8th, according to Pro Football Focus. Broderick Jones is moving over to the left side. You've got a hole at the right side. Bring in Fuaga, solidify that group. He's a guy that could very well come off the board in the first 15 picks, so Tomlin may want to trade up and go after and get him. But he's a technician as a pass protector. Take care of that investment, Russell Wilson, and get things going there on that offensive line. Miami sitting there at 21. Look, this is a team, I think had a frustrating season. Ultimately they lose to the Bills in Week 18 at home, and ultimately have to take on KC, and they lose 26-7. You look at things, a lot of moves. Defensively, bringing in Jordan Brooks. They bring in Anthony Walker at inside linebacker, Jordan Poyer at safety, Kyle Fuller at corner, which takes care of that release of Xavier Howard, Brandon Jones, Deshaun Elliott at safety. So you shore those positions up. But here, edge rush. Jalen Phillips tears his Achilles. Bradley Chubb tears his ACL. They're supposed to try to make it back for the start of the year. Is it going to happen? That's a big question mark. Plus, Andrew Van Ginkel gone in free agency. Shaq Barrett was brought in as insurance, but could we see him target Laiatu Latu or Chop Robinson here? I think that is entirely possible. Keep an eye out for that. With Christian Wilkins leaving for Las Vegas, trying to fill his shoes, they bring in Neville Gallimore, Benito Jones, Jonathan Harris. No difference makers there. Johnny Newton with Byron Murphy off the board could be just what they're looking for. Offensive line, you lose Robert Hunt, signed a 4-year, $100 million deal with Carolina, which is insane. So there's a hole at right guard. Plus Robert Jones, Lester Cotton, they're back, but they both did not have great years. I think they end up targeting Graham Barton, 5 position versatility, such a technician, so consistent with the hand placement, moves really well. Lacks ideal length. His arms are shorter than 33 inches. So I think the best move is to kick him inside You've got Aaron Brewer taking over the center spot, so I think ultimately let him play guard, and I think pivot will ultimately be his spot. But at least for now, that's where he ends up going. So Philly sitting there at number 22 overall. Now, the Eagles, I think things will look a lot different this year. Saquon Barkley is the running back. They bring in Devontae Parker as a number 3 wide receiver. Paris Campbell as well. They bring in Matt Hennessy to kind of shore up the interior of that offensive line as well. And then defensively, look, Devin White's going to be playing with and Oren Burks on the inside. You got Zach Bond, who can get after the quarterback, as can Bryce Huff. And then at nickel, you've got, obviously, C.J. Gardner-Johnson was brought back. You look at the cornerback spot, though. You've got James Bradbury, you've got Darius Slay. Safety spots, you've got Sidney Brown, you've got Reed Blankenship. Keely Ringo, Eli Ricks, Josh Jobe, do they really move the needle there at the cornerback spot? I think at the end of the day, when you look at this group, they need to have a guy like Cooper DeJean who can play corner, he can play safety, he can play on the outside, he can play nickel, he can play all over the place. And I think his versatility just makes all too much sense for the Eagles. That's ultimately who I'd target. I think you could potentially target a right tackle like Tyler Guyton to replace Lane Johnson someday. But I think because you need to address that defense, especially in the secondary, especially because James Bradbury, Darius Slay starting to get a little bit older, you need to start thinking about the future. Cooper DeJean could be a guy that could step right in there. 23, the Vikings. They got the pick from Houston via Cleveland. And ultimately, when you look at Minnesota, this pick is probably going elsewhere. But until they actually make the trade, we're sticking with this pick. And I ultimately think that Johnny Newton would be a great pick for them. You look at the D-line for them. They brought in Jerry Tillery and Jonah Williams in free agency. You've got Jonathan Bullard, Harrison Phillips. None of these guys really, strike fear into opposing offenses getting off the board, right? Or getting off the ball. When you think about Johnny Newton, this is a guy that has that first step quickness. He reminds me a lot of Grady Jarrett coming off the football. 6'2", 280 pounds, 18 career sacks, 27.5 tackles for loss, very active. 3 straight seasons with at least 50 tackles from the defensive tackle spot. I actually, if Minnesota ends up keeping that pick and they stay at number 11, they still get a quarterback, and then they can get a defensive tackle like Newton there at 23, I think that would be a huge win for the Vikings. 24 is Dallas. And Dallas, obviously, there are some decisions that need to be made for the Cowboys. You don't have Tyron Smith anymore. Tyler Smith, ultimately likely to move outside to left tackle. You've got Terrence Steele at right tackle, who struggled. You got Brock Hoffman potentially right now playing center. It's going to be a much different looking team. Right now, your top running back is Rico Dowdle with Deuce Vaughn. You don't have a number 1 running back, so that's a little bit different. You've got CeeDee Lamb and Brandon Cooks, but no Michael Gallup. So Jalen Tolbert's your number 3. Could they potentially target another wide receiver? Maybe Adonai Mitchell. I think that's possible. You look at that defensive tackle spot, Byron Murphy and Johnny Newton, if they were available, potentially compete with Oso Odighizuwa there for that spot next to the nose tackle Mozzie Smith. Again, it's going to be a much different looking defense. Linebacker, maybe Edgerrin Cooper, might be a little bit early for him. I just look at Damone Clark, DeMarvion Overshown. Are they ready for that spot? Ultimately, I look at that offensive line. I think Jackson Powers-Johnson makes all too much sense there at the pivot. Get that center, a guy that's going to solidify things with Tyler Biadasz not on the roster. Tyler Smith ultimately should be playing the guard spot. I think they use picks to really address the offensive line with both of their first 2 picks in the draft. But I think getting a center like Jackson Powers-Johnson, he's physical, he's nasty, he's mean, and I think he's going to bring that intensity to the offensive line there for Dallas. 6'3", 328, the Remington Trophy winner. I like that pick for them. At number 25, Green Bay. Now the Packers are sitting here, and obviously David Bakhtiari's gone. You've got Rasheed Walker that could potentially line up at left tackle, but you need to address that spot for sure. D-line, I think, is set. You could potentially get another edge rusher, but look, you just went there with Lucas Van Ness. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense either. Safety spot, I think it's a little too early to go after Tyler Nubin or Cam Kinchins. So really, I think this pick, the focus really should be on that offensive line. Target Amarius Mims. You can play him either at left tackle or right tackle. Zach Tom really playing out of position. Maybe you kick him inside to guard, or you play Amarius Mims at left tackle. But Mims is freakishly long. Hasn't played a ton of football because of some of the injuries that he's been racking up. But at 6'8", 340 pounds, with a 5'07", 40, 36 and an eighth inch arms, huge hands, 11 and a quarter inches. I think this is the guy that you want to bring in and be the guy to protect Jordan Love. 26, Tampa Bay. Tampa Bay loses a couple of guys, right? And so I think this is where they could go in a couple of directions. When you look at Tampa, the cornerback spot is an area of need. They traded away Carlton Davis. So you look at Jamel Dean, Zion McCullum, Bryce Hall. I think there's work that needs to be done there. And then you look at the edge rush spot. You got Joe Tryon-Shoyinka. You got Yaya Diaby. But you need another edge rusher, someone that's going to take the place of Shaq Barrett. I think at the end of the day, that cornerback spot, this is where Nate Wiggins comes off the board. The 4.28 40. Look, this is a guy, he's 6'2", 6'3", tremendous length, a guy that's going to handle the vertical routes. This could also be where Chop Robinson goes as well, by the way. But I think what makes the most sense to me is to get that solidified. Get a top corner, get a CB1, a guy that can hold things down on the outside. Don't forget about that offensive line. If Graham Barton's available, I think he would make a lot of sense, because you look at that interior line, you've got Cody Mock, you've got Sua Opeta, Robert Hainsey, and I think he would be an upgrade over any of those guys. So Tyler Guyton potentially there, if Luke Gadecki, if you decide to move him inside, that could also be an option as well. But I think target the defense first, and there's some depth on the offensive line in this draft class, so I think you could ultimately target an offensive lineman later on in the draft. Arizona again, Arizona, their second first-round pick, and again, when you look at this group, we've already targeted the wide receiver. So the question is where are they really going to go with this pick now? You look at the edge rush position. You've got Zaven Collins. You've got Dennis Gardeck, as your starters. There's really not a guy on this roster that screams, hey, I can put some pressure on the quarterback. I think ultimately this is where Chop Robinson goes. Chop Robinson, not a ton of production, but a guy that is explosive coming off the edge. He's the guy that I think is going to win. He's the reason why Michigan stopped trying to throw the football against the Nittany Lions, because, frankly, Carson Barnhart could not block him at right tackle. So you had to change things up, improvise, and ultimately they went to the run. But Chop Robinson is a guy, his explosiveness, he's going to bring a dynamic to that the pass defense that they just don't have. They need an edge rusher that's going to be able to get pressure, consistent pressure on the quarterback, and I think Chop Robinson is a guy that can absolutely do that. Now, when you look at the Bills win the East, ultimately don't make it to the Super Bowl. Another disappointing year for them, because it's really Super Bowl or bust. And when you look at Josh Allen, he's got Stephon Diggs still, but that receiver spot, you got Curtis Samuel that you brought in, Mac Hollins as well, Khalil Shakir, Gabe Davis is gone, but I still think you can get another receiver in this year's draft. When you look at things, they could potentially go, get a guy up front. They picked up Austin Johnson. They picked up Casey Toohill, Nicholas Morrow to be a backup linebacker. I think they could potentially use another corner. So Ennis Rakestraw makes some sense here as well. Ka'ir Elam, this is going to really be a make-or-break year for him. I think he's going to be looked at to have much better influence on the defensive side of the ball. I think Jackson Powers Johnson could potentially come in and take over that center spot that was vacated by Mitch Morse. But I think at the end of the day, you look at a guy like Ladd McConkey, get that number 2 wideout, get a guy who, look, he's a freakish athlete at 6 foot, 186 pounds. You see the explosiveness. You saw that there at the combine. This guy was virtually uncoverable, at the Senior Bowl. But then you watch the route running ability. When he was healthy, he was just so fluid. 4.39 40, 1.52 10-yard split at 6 foot and 186 pounds. I think Buffalo, he could very well come off the board as high as number 20. So if Buffalo can get him there at 28, that'd be a huge win. You look at Detroit sitting there at number 29, and Detroit is a team that, they lose Jonah Jackson, they bring in Kevin Zeitler, they need help, for Aiden Hutchinson, they bring in DJ Reader at nose. You got Marcus Davenport opposite him. You've got, obviously, to go with John Kaminsky and Josh Paschal. And then obviously, James Houston as well. Secondary, knew there was going to be an issue there. They re-signed Emmanuel Mosley. You've got Carlton Davis and Amik Robertson, Brian Brantz as your nickel, along with Kirby Joseph and Ifeatu Melifonwu. Cameron Sutton was released with legal troubles. So I look at this group, and there aren't a lot of holes. But when I look at things with that receiver spot, you've got Amon-Ra St. Brown, Jameson Williams. Josh Reynolds is gone, so they need another wideout, and I'm picking them to go after Adonai Mitchell, 6'2", 205, another guy who is the vertical threat, pretty decent route runner for a guy his size, 6'2", 205, 4'3", 440, 39.5-inch vertical leap, 11.4 broad jump. This is a dude who he's that go-to vertical threat. And to have that size as well, I think he'd be a nice complement to St. Brown and Jameson Williams. The Ravens sitting there at number 30. Now, the Ravens, obviously this is going to be an interesting pick for them. They took a receiver in last year's draft in Zay Flowers. You've got Rashad Bateman, who's basically been a disappointment to this point. You've got Nelson Aguilar. You bring in Derrick Henry as a running back. You look at Ronnie Stanley, Andrew Voorhees, Tyler Linderbaum, Ben Cleveland. The right tackle right now, that's the biggest question mark. I think you could, Daniel Fa'alele is sitting there. This could be where Tyler Guyton comes off the board. Tyler Guyton would end up taking over that right tackle spot, and from Oklahoma, athletic guy. I think that makes a lot of sense. And look at the defense. I don't know that defense is going to be where they're targeting. I think they can go either Tyler Guyton, or they end up going receiver again, and they go after Keon Coleman. Bring a dynamic to this team that they just don't have. 6'3" wide receiver. Yes, he ran the 4.6 40 at the combine, but like everyone has been saying, especially on NFL Network, you watch him run in the gauntlet. He was so fast through that. Confidence in his hands, never slowed down, ran through the football. So that was impressive to me. So I think either one of those guys is ultimately where they're going to target that 30th overall pick, which then takes you to San Francisco. And San Francisco, look, they need a right tackle as well. Colton McKivitz has struggled. They brought in Brandon Parker, but he's more of a depth piece. So Tyler Guyton could absolutely come off the board there as well. You look at the defense. They brought in Leonard Floyd, Yetur Gross-Matos. You've got Drake Jackson on the roster there. Obviously, you've got Nick Bosa. At defensive tackle, you brought in Malik Collins. You've got Jordan Elliott. I think this is a team that could use a corner as well. I'm looking at Ennis Rakestraw. If they don't end up getting Tyler Guyton there at right tackle, I'm looking at Ennis Rakestraw, and I think that would be a smart pick. Ambry Thomas, I thought, was a disappointment opposite Travarius Ward. So I look at that and I say, obviously they also have Diamador Lenore as well, but Ambry Thomas, they need an upgrade over him, and so I think Ennis Rakestraw can end up being that guy again if they don't get Tyler Guyton, which then takes us to KC, and KC's going to take a wideout. I think Adonai Mitchell was the guy that I was targeting for them. At one point I had Ladd McConkey. They're both going to be off the board. So I think ultimately you get the guy who ran the 4.21 40 at the combine, and you get Xavier Worthy. Yes, you already have Marquise Brown on the roster. You've got Justin Watson, Rashee Rice. You need guys that have speed, be able to stretch the defense, and I think he definitely fits the bill. KC could trade up to get Adonai Mitchell. Kind kind of would replace Marcus Valdez-Scantling, but I think they have to go receiver at this point. Could they potentially go defensive tackle, go with a guy like Darius Robinson? I think it's possible. I think Darius Robinson is an interesting guy because I also look at Baltimore and Brent Urban, Justin Madubuike. There's not a whole lot of depth behind them. Brent Urban, a guy that's played a lot of football there. He's 32 years of age, so there's a possibility that they could potentially look for his eventual replacement. So Darius Robinson, that's another spot for him. KC, he could potentially go there, but I think KC ultimately, they need receiver help for Patrick Mahomes. So that's ultimately where they go. Carolina Panthers don't have a first-round pick, but they do have the number 33 overall selection. So when you look at Carolina, what have they done so far this offseason? They've made it a point to attack the receiver spot with Deontay Johnson and David Moore, bringing both of them in to team with Jonathan Mingo, Adam Thielen, Terrace Marshall. They still don't have a true number one wideout, so that's a little odd here with this group. We'll get to that here in a second. Defensively, you've got Derek Brown. You bring in Ashawn Robinson. I thought that was a nice pickup. DJ Wonham will be a good edge rusher for them. Shaq Thompson pairing him with Josie Jewell. I like that. Kalavan Chason, never really lived up to the bill as a pass rusher, but that pickup was nice. Xavier Woods teaming with Jordan Fuller. You bring in Dane Jackson at a cornerback spot. They could still go with another corner potentially. Robert Hunt, obviously they paid all that money. They also have Damian Lewis, so you solidify the interior of that line. I'm looking at that tight end spot. Tommy Tremble, Ian Thomas, still too early at the number 33 overall selection for them to really go after a tight end. It's still way too early for Jatavian Sanders. So what do you do? Where do you go if you're them? When you're looking at that receiver spot, Ricky Pearsall has really showed up. I think it's a little too early for him, 6'1", 189, but showed off tremendous athleticism, especially his playmaking ability down the field. Everyone remembers that catch against Charlotte, where he backhands the ball and ends up catching the bottom end of the football. I mean, that was absolutely phenomenal work. But could they go corner? That's something that I think is interesting. I look at a guy like Kamari Lassiter's stock is starting to drop. Cornerback Kool-Aid McKinstry. Kool-Aid, I mentioned Rakestraw. I think McKinstry could very well come off the board before Rakestraw. So if McKinstry goes in round one, then this pick is Ennis Rakestraw, and vice versa. I think ultimately you get that corner to pair with J.C. Horn. Dane Jackson really can be your nickel. I think Dane Jackson would be a better nickel than Troy Hill. Dane Jackson would be a nice third corner as well. So I think that's ultimately where they target and where the direction that Carolina goes with their first pick. And then Houston. Good Lord. Houston has had quite the offseason on the defensive side of the football. D'Amico Ryan's really kind of carving things out for himself. You bring in Daniil Hunter opposite Will Anderson. You got Folu Fotukasi and Danico Autry, D-tackle. Tim Settle, Mario Edwards brought in as well. Inside backer, now you've got Aziz Alshire. Delshon Phillips was brought in. And then you got Jeff Okudah, C.J. Henderson at the cornerback spot with Derek Stingley. Joe Mixon has now been brought in as your running back, team with Damian Pierce. So a lot of impressive moves for this organization. I thought they've done a lot with this group. Nico Collins obviously is and Tank Dell, Noah Brown are your top three wideouts, along with Robert Woods, John Mechie. I've seen people talk about the receiver position. I don't know that makes a lot of sense for them. I look at this group. There's a lot of work that's been done on the defensive side of the football in free agency, which is why I do think they end up targeting the offense in the draft. And so I look at the tight end position. You've got Dalton Schultz, Tegan Quitoriano. Could this be where Jatavian Sanders comes off the board? You also look at the offensive line, Laramie Tunsil and Titus Howard. And Laramie Tunsil, he's still, he's only 29 years of age. Could you potentially get an upgrade over Titus Howard in the draft? This is a very deep offensive tackle group, so there's a chance that we could see them potentially target a guy like Patrick Paul out of Houston. Kingsley Suamataia also makes a lot of sense as well. I think the local product would have the edge if we were looking at that group. I think that makes a lot of sense. At the linebacker spot, you're looking at that strong side backer, Peyton Wilson. We saw the performance that he had at the Combine. If this dude is healthy, he's an easy second rounder. He's a favorite player of mine. 6'4", 233, ran that 4.4, 340. 154 10-yard split. He was all over the field. The guy that plays sideline to sideline. He can drop into coverage. He can blitz the quarterback. Does a little bit of everything. If Edgerrin Cooper's off the board, then I think Peyton Wilson will end up being that guy. I just think he'd be an upgrade over Henry To'o at that strong side backer. So those would be the two guys that I would target for sure. Which then leaves us with the Cleveland Browns. Now the Cleveland Browns, they've been busy themselves. You've got Jerry Jeudy that you've brought in from Denver, to team with Amari Cooper, Elijah Moore, Cedric Tillman, David Bell at that receiver spot. So that was a nice pickup. They've been aggressive there at the quarterback spot. You now have Jameis Winston, Tyler Huntley, DTR to team, to back up Deshaun Watson. You brought in Deontay Foreman and Nyheim Hines there to kind of round out that running back group with Nick Chubb and then Jerome Ford. Defensively, you've got Jordan Hicks and Devin Bush that you've brought in to take care of that linebacker position. Tony Brown to back up Denzel Ward and Martin Emerson, Greg Newsome there at the cornerback spot. Quentin Jefferson's a nice pickup there as a backup defensive lineman. You've got Zadarius Smith to team with Myles Garrett already up front. You've got Ogbo Okoronkwo. You've got Alex Wright as well. So, question mark really is going to be what direction do they want to go with this pick. They've already picked up DeJuan Jones, a season ago to back up Jack Conklin. So I think receiver was really a direction that I was leaning for them until they made the move for Jerry Jeudy. Now it just doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Again, this is another team that the linebacker position was a position that I thought that they might target. But ultimately, I look at that cornerback spot. You've got three guys that I feel really good about. After that, I'm not as confident in. So I look at a guy like Max Melton from Rutgers, 5'11", 187. This is a guy that the ball skills were evident. This is a guy that I thought played Marvin Harrison Jr. really well as well. So I look at Max Melton, 5'11", again, 187, as I said, 4.39 40, 40.5-inch vertical leap, 11.4 broad jump. Explosive, athletic, excellent ball skills. You bring him in as that basically the third corner. If you're calling Greg Newsome that nickel, then that third corner there on the outside, or a guy that you can potentially bring into the slot, I think that makes a lot of sense. You team him with Denzel Ward, Martin Emerson, then you got Greg Newsome as your nickel. I think that really kind of solidifies that cornerback group, and I think Max Melton sitting there with Cleveland at I think their first pick, if I didn't mention it before, is number 54 overall. And so I think that just is an area that makes a lot of sense for Cleveland to take a guy like Max Melton, the guy that I think has been rising up draft boards into not only that day 2 conversation, but all the way into the second round conversation. The Scarlet Knight product, he's really done well for himself, not only in his final year there at Rutgers, but definitely during all of the pre-draft process. So that's really what I see with free agency and what things have done with these teams, and maybe what changes their focus with the first round picks. I'm getting my mock draft together, getting everything updated for the website. I hope to have that done here in the next few days. And then once I get that first round tweaked and all together, that there are going to be changes made in free agency, and I'm going to have to tweak it all over again. But I'm also going to start working on my 2nd through 7th rounds, make sure I get that 7-round mock all tightened up. So when I go to work with it, I'm going to post my 1st round once I get that done. Obviously, I'll still have to go back through and finish 2nd through 7th. So if you do go to readyforthedraft.com and are looking at the mock drafts, take a look at the date completed, the last completion date, because as I get into finish the 1st round, I won't have the 2nd through 7th update. I do want to get that 1st round posted. So then as I get into things, you'll start seeing 2nd through 7th start to get updated as well, and then continue to make those updates all the way up until draft day. And we're still about a month away before that actually happens. So still a lot of time, a lot of stuff to cover. We still need to know what's happening with Minnesota. Are they going to be trading up as everyone expects them to? Could we potentially see Denver trade up to potentially get a quarterback? Could we see the Raiders do that? What about the Giants? Could the Raiders then decide instead to trade back into round 1, target Michael Penix Jr.? Same thing with Denver and Bo Nix. If they don't think that he's valuable enough at 12, could they potentially trade back into round 1 and get him at the back end of round 1? I think that's ultimately where those two guys are going to go. More so with Michael Penix Jr. because of those injury history, 4 straight seasons with injuries there at Indiana, 2 AC joints and 2 ACLs. Bo Nix, he's intelligent, he's a smart quarterback, he knows what to do with the football. There are those that feel that he's a backup quarterback. I just don't know that makes a whole lot of sense. You think about Brock Purdy and where he came off the board in the 7th round. I'm not saying Bo Nix fits that same bill, but it's one of those things to where, is Bo Nix a top 15 quarterback? Do you take him with the top 15 picks? I don't think so. You look at everyone's overall rankings, Bo Nix does not fit that bill. I think Denver, it would behoove them to address another position and then trade back into round 1. Same thing with the Raiders and Michael Penix Jr. I think Penix Jr. to me feels more like a 1st rounder given the arm talent with him. It's just the injury history. So if you could trade back into the back half of round 1, somewhere in that 23 to 29 range, and target Michael Penix Jr. for if you're the Raiders, considering you've got Aiden O'Connell and you've got Gardner Minshew there, those are going to be guys that Penix Jr. can learn from and ultimately take over the spot. Look, Minshew was the guy that was there to support Anthony Richardson. So I look at Michael Penix Jr. He could do very much the same thing, kind of be that bridge quarterback there as well. I think it's kind of shaping up for them to potentially make a move like that. Heck, the Raiders could potentially try to make a move for Jaden Daniels, given the history there with Antonio Pierce and Jaden Daniels with their time at ASU. A lot of stuff to think about. We're going to continue to have a lot of these conversations. We're going to take a look at position by position, really how things shape up for the draft and where a lot of these guys I think will end up going, how many guys at each position will play by the numbers, and take a look at just the overall numbers, average of guys coming off the board in each round, who's going to come off the board where and when, how many players do we think might get drafted. Really is, doesn't even depend or doesn't even matter with the actual number of teams and which team you're actually going to and who's going to be drafting you. It's really, where could these guys come off the board? What round, do they have slated? What round are they graded out at? And ultimately talk about that and talk our way through the number of guys at each position, each round of the draft, and really take care of that going, like I said, position by position and having all of those conversations. So there's a lot to talk